Yesterday we have looked at the Riemann zeta function, which is just defined as the sum for n going from 1 to infinity n to the minus s. And what has been proved already in the very first lecture was the fact that this converges for real part of s strictly larger than 1. In fact, it is a little bit better than only a usual convergence. It's a uniform convergence. It is uniformly convergent. On any compact subset, or even on any half plane of the form, you take the set of complex numbers such that the real part of S is strictly larger than sigma, with a sigma which is bigger than 1. So if I draw a picture, we have the plane, we have the point 1, we choose any line strictly on the right hand side of this point 1, we look at this plane, this half plane, and on this half plane the series is uniformly convergent. And where does it come from? It just comes from the fact that in fact we have a bound. If S is on this half plane, then absolute value of n to the minus s is less than or equal to n to the minus sigma, and the sum of the n minus sigma is convergent. Therefore, we have a uniform convergence. Now, since the functions that we have on the right-hand side are all holomorphic functions, in fact, we know that when we have a uniform limit of holomorphic functions, the limit is holomorphic, and this explains why zeta is holomorphic, but it is a little bit better. We can, without taking any without being cautious, we can take as many derivatives as we wish. So not only we have this equality that holds, but also all derivatives hold. Let us just write the first derivative. The first derivative is zeta prime of s is equal, I take the first derivative with respect to s, minus the sum for n going from 1 to infinity n to the minus s log n. Because the derivative of n to the minus s, which is e to the minus s log n, is indeed minus log n of n to the minus s. So this is valid for real part of s larger than 1. And the same is true for higher derivatives. Therefore, if we want to expand in power series the Riemann zeta function near a point A, let A be a point, in C, with real part of A larger than 0, larger than 1, then I would like to have an expansion in power series sum s minus a to the power n times some coefficient. Let us call for the moment this coefficient Cn of a for n going from 0 to infinity, and I would like to have this when s is near a. So this is the Taylor expansion of this holomorphic function near this point. In fact, the coefficient Cn of a, what is this coefficient? Cn of a is nothing else than the nth derivative of zeta at a divided by n factorial. And now, the nth derivative of zeta at a, I can just compute it by using this kind of method, which I repeat n times, and I get, in fact, it is, yes, in fact, perhaps the n is not very clever, because, in fact, let me call this k. It will perhaps be better, because otherwise I have also a summation with n. So it is just this when I take the case derivative, and it will be minus 1 to the power k, n to the power minus a, sum for n going from 1 to sum from L, sum for n going from 1 to infinity, n to the minus a log n to the power k. And therefore I have an explicit formula for these coefficients. This is when a lies in the convergent region of convergence, so in the half-plane real part of a strictly larger than 1. And the question is, can we do something similar when we are, for example, at the point 1 or at the point 0, or let us say at any other point where in fact the series does not converge? We have nevertheless a holomorphic function, a meromorphic function at least, therefore it should have an expansion, therefore we would like to have a formula. And so the question which I want to address here is, what is the, we cannot say Taylor expansion at 1, because at 1 we know that we have a simple pole. So in fact, since we have a pole, we have no Taylor series, but only a Laurent series. There will be a polar part, 1 over s minus 1. So what is the Laurent expansion? Of the Riemann zeta function at 1, and yes, I have the factorial. Yes, that is exactly what I was thinking, and the Taylor expansion because at 0 we know that the function is holomorphic at 0, or more generally at negative integers. So this is a question I would like to address. And so in fact we can first give a definition . So the Laurent expansion of zeta at 1 has the form there is 1 over s minus 1, because we know in fact that we have a pole with residue 1, in fact that is exactly the singularity that we have at 1, and then what remains is a holomorphic function, so I can write down sum for k going from 0 to infinity. It is very natural, in order to avoid always complicated formula, to put a minus 1 to the power k to the power divided by k factorial, so that we do not always carry these things which I would forget otherwise on the blackboard. Then we have a certain coefficient which I call gamma k, and then we have minus 1 to the power k. So this is the expansion, and the definition is the following. The numbers gamma k are called the Stieltjes constants. Because Stieltjes was a mathematician who introduced them first, if I am not mistaken, around 1800 85 or something like this. I am not completely sure of the precise year, but more or less it was at the end of the 19th century. And we would like to compute them. So, in fact, we could try more or less to do something very stupid and say a certain number of things which are completely false. For example, let us assume that the Riemann zeta function is in fact has no pole at 1. This is not true. That it is holomorphic. And that we can just apply the formula that we have here when we take A equal 1. So we would expect the number gamma k to be something like, in fact, the formula which I have here, where I take A equal 1. So something like the sum for n going from 1 to infinity of log n to the power k divided by n. Of course, this does not make sense because my series does not converge. But we know from an exercise that I think has been done in the seminar yesterday evening, and we will prove it again today, that the gamma 0, the constant which just appears after 1 over s minus 1, is a gamma constant, is the Euler constant. Namely, gamma 0 is the limit when capital N goes to infinity of sum from 1 to capital N of 1 over n, where you remove log of capital N. So, a priori, what we would expect for gamma 0 is just the sum of 1 over n for n going from 1 to infinity. It is not this because it diverges. It's harmonic series which diverges. But, in fact, it's not so different from the harmonic series. You just stop the harmonic series at a certain level, capital N. You remove a small elementary term, which is log n, and then you get a limit. And, in fact, this limit is exactly the number that you wish. So, in fact, it means there is some kind of truth in this expectation, and this is this kind of truth which I would like to explain today, not only for 1 but also for 0 and also for negative integers. So more or less to explain what are the relation between this divergent series and the coefficients which really exist when we take expansions. So this is a motivation. So for this, I will introduce a notion of regularization of a series or of a sequence, which will be the kind of regularization that we will use. I give so definition of a regularization. Let U index capital N, let us say for n larger than or equal to 1, be a sequence of complex numbers. assume that there exists a polynomial P of xy in two variables such that the limit without constant term, without a constant term, such that the limit when capital N goes to plus infinity of un minus p of n and log n is equal exists. So your series in fact behaves when n goes to infinity like a polynomial in n and log n without constant term plus a constant, which is this limit, and then this limit will be called the regularized value of the sequence. Then P is unique, and this limit, or I could perhaps say it, I could, yes, no, okay, and this limit is called the regularized limit of the sequence un. So, proof of the unicity of P, in fact, if P and Q have this property, then P minus Q of n and log n okay. Yes, has a limit when n goes to infinity. And this implies that P minus Q should be a constant, but since P and Q have no constant term, this constant have to be 0. Because if P minus Q were not a constant polynomial, you would take in this polynomial the highest power of n and the highest power of log n, and in fact this P minus Q of n log n would be equivalent, when n goes to infinity, to the monomial in n and log n coming from these two highest powers. And so this explains that you have generally only one choice. When there is one, it is unique. And then if it is unique, we just remove this kind of thing from our sequence and we get a regularized limit. And now with this notation, I can just write the Euler constant as an example. The Euler constant is the following. Example, the regularized limit of sum for n going from 1 to capital N 1 over n is the Euler constant. Just because you have to ask, can I remove from this thing a polynomial in n log n so that the limit exists, a polynomial without constant term, indeed the just log n satisfies this property. I remove it, and when I remove it, I just get the value of the Euler constant. This is example 1. Let us work out a second example. Second example, the regularized limit of the sum for n going from 1 to capital N of log n is minus a half log of 2 pi. Let us prove this second example. So then
you can find also the product of all numbers, yes?
What?
The product.
Yes, I could take the exponential and take the product, and indeed that is exactly what I will do immediately. So if I try to compute this sum, this sum is nothing else than the log of n factorial. And of course we have Stirling formula. Yes, it is, excuse me, it's not minus, it is plus. Plus, there is no minus. By Stirling formula, factorial n is equivalent to n to the power n, e to the power minus n, square root of 2 pi n when n goes to infinity. The fact that these two things are equivalent means that the quotient is going to 1. Therefore, the difference of the logarithm is going to 0. So log of n factorial minus n log n plus n minus a half of log n minus a half log of 2 pi goes to 0 when n goes to infinity. And therefore, if we remove from this log of n factorial, so from this sum, if we remove this polynomial in n log n, the polynomial involving the term n log n, the term n, and the term log n, not the constant. If we remove just this polynomial, which is a polynomial without constant term, in fact, there will be a limit, and this limit will be 1/2 log of 2 pi, and this means that the regularized value is indeed 1/2 log of 2 pi. So we are now able, more or less, to give a meaning to certain series which are a priori divergent, but we can nevertheless, by this procedure, assign them some value. And we want to understand what are the relations between these values that we can compute directly like this and the coefficients of the expansion of the Riemann zeta function at 1, at 0, or at negative integers. So that is our goal now. And I just announce you the final result of the talk today, but it will take a certain amount of time, more or less, to proceed up to that. So statement of the result to be proved. First, the Laurent expansion of the Riemann zeta function at 1 is 1 over s minus 1 plus sum for n going from for k going from 0 to infinity minus 1 to the power k divided by k factorial gamma k s minus 1 to the power k, where gamma k is the regularized value of the sum that we truncate at capital N, sum for small n going up to capital N of log n to the power k divided by n. So in fact, more precisely, if when I say the regularized value, it means that you can remove from this sum a polynomial in capital N and log n, such that when you remove it, you will have the limit, a polynomial without constant term. And in fact, I just write exactly what is the polynomial that you will need to remove. You will have, in fact, gamma k is the limit when n goes to plus infinity, sum for n going from 1 to n, log n to the power k divided by n, and the polynomial that you have to remove is just log of capital N to the power k plus 1 divided by k plus 1. This is a polynomial that you have to remove in order to get a limit. And in particular, as gamma 0 is the Euler constant. But generally, in fact, I prefer, of course, generally in the literature one writes the thing like this, as the limit of this. But in fact, I generally prefer not to write this term, because this term is in fact here only to make the thing converge. So in fact, it's the polynomial that you have to remove in order to destroy the behavior at infinity and to get a constant. I prefer more or less to interpret it always as a regularized value, because this regularized value is much more natural. It is just the thing that you get when you take absolutely formally the case derivative up to sign of the Riemann zeta function at the point 1. And in fact, similarly, the Taylor expansion of zeta at 1, at 0, is, this time it is the sum for n going from k going from 0 to infinity. Again, a minus 1 to the power k divided by k factorial. Let me call these numbers delta k, s to the power k. This will be the Taylor expansion, where delta k is the regularized value of the sum for n going from 1 to capital N. You just take formally the case derivative of the Riemann zeta function at 0. So when you take it formally, you get log n to the power k multiplied by n to the power 0. So it is just the sum. So, and this works only if k is larger than 1. For k equals 0, it does not work. There is an exception. But not for k equals 0. The formula is not valid for k equals 0. We have delta index 0, which is minus a half, because we know that zeta of 0 is minus a half. So we have to understand different things here. We have to understand why is there an exception? Why does this rule not always work? For example, if you try to do the same thing at -1, you will have 2 exceptions. At -2, you will have 3 exceptions. And therefore, this kind of thing that we think is absolutely obvious is not fully obvious because there are exceptions. And we have to understand how the exceptions look like and how you can get them. But besides a finite number of exceptions, each time you are at a negative integer, in fact, this general rule works. As an application, in particular, in fact, zeta prime of 0, which is in fact the first coefficient of this expansion, is -1 to the power 1 divided by 1 factorial delta 1. So it is minus delta 1. And since delta 1 is just the regularized value of the sum of log n, which I had computed before by using Stirling formula, zeta prime of 0 is in fact minus a half log of 2 pi. So this is the kind of thing that we want to prove. And of course, Stirling did this proof in the case of 1. When he introduced his constant, he proved this theorem, the fact that the gamma k are indeed these numbers at 1. The proof which I shall choose today is not his proof and is in fact in some sense simpler than most proofs that you find in the textbooks for this kind of question. And the reason why I choose this proof is because I have in my head to go at some moment to generalizations of the Riemann zeta function, which are the multiple zeta functions. And in fact, the proof which I will give you is the proof that generalizes with no difficulty to the general case. So in fact, we have to choose among all proofs that exist one which is which can be generalized. So now we know already where we want to go, and now I will more or less try to start again with something which I have spoken of in my first lecture, which is the translation formula. So we go back to the translation formula. I think it is worse. Yesterday I went a little bit quick on this translation formula without being too careful about really writing the upper bounds for all terms. I will be a little bit more careful today so that in fact we know exactly what we have to do in order to prove everything perfectly well. So the first thing that we were using was the following thing. If you compute n minus 1 to the power minus s, 1 minus s minus n to the power 1 minus s, let us say, divided by s minus 1. Previously I had written a s minus 1 on the other side. This is the same as n minus s. I will just write the not as a sum because it's difficult to understand how the sum looks like. I prefer to write down just the three first term, and you understand how it's going later on. N to the minus s plus s over 2 factorial n to the minus s minus 1 plus s times s plus 1 divided by 3 factorial n to the minus s minus 2 plus etc. So it is just by using the Taylor and this works for n strictly bigger than 1. We have this relation. And in fact, in order to prove the translation formula, I said I will just add all these equalities for n going from 2 to infinity. But now we will do something slightly different. We will add this kind of thing. Let us add this inequality. For all n larger than some capital N for a given n which is larger than or equal to 1. So when I add the things on this side, in fact I have a concatenating series. The first term corresponds to small n equal capital N plus 1, and therefore I get capital N to the 1 minus s minus capital N plus 1 to the 1 minus s, and then capital N plus 1 to the 1 minus s minus capital N plus 2 to the 1 minus s. When I add all this, I get capital N to the 1 minus s divided by s minus 1 is equal to. And now here I have to sum the n to the minus s for all n strictly bigger than n. I will call this zeta s index n. So what is zeta s index capital N? It is just the sum of the n minus s from n plus 1 to infinity. Or if you prefer, it is the same thing as the Riemann zeta function zeta of s minus the sum where you go up to n. So this is what I call zeta in s index n. This is this term. Then I have plus s over 2 factorial, and the next term is just zeta s plus 1 index capital N. And I continue plus s times s plus 1 divided by 2 factorial zeta of s plus 2. 3 factorial. Absolutely. Zeta s plus 2 n, etc. So we have this kind of expansion. And now we would like to have reasonably good bounds on the things that we add in order to be completely sure that the series that we have converges. And even we would like to have uniform convergence on any compact set. So the first thing to do is to try to get a bound for zeta Sn. Let us write a small lemma. The absolute value of zeta, so if, let us say, the real part of S is, let us say, larger than 3/2, it will be enough for me. Then the absolute value of this zeta Sn is bounded by 2 to the power 2 times n to the power 1 minus sigma, where sigma is the real part of S. So I want to write down an explicit bound which works and which is not too complicated to carry. Let us try to do this. In fact, I use exactly the same trick as the trick that was used in the first lecture by Maxime. So this is bounded by the sum for n going from capital N plus 1 to infinity of the absolute value of n to the minus s. And the absolute value of n to the minus s is nothing else than n to the minus sigma, where sigma is the real part of s. And in order to get an estimation of this sum, I compare this sum with the corresponding integral. It is less than or equal to the integral going from capital N to plus infinity of x to the minus sigma dx. And now I compute this integral. So in fact, this integral is just x to the power 1 minus sigma divided by y minus sigma, which I have to evaluate between capital N and plus infinity. Since my sigma is larger than 3/2, x to the y minus sigma is going to 0 at infinity, and at n it is n to the power 1 minus sigma, and what I get here is this is equal to n to the power 1 minus sigma divided by sigma minus 1. And since I have assumed that sigma is larger than 3/2, 1 over sigma minus 1 is in fact bounded by 2, so it is bounded by 2 times n to the power 1 minus sigma. And now, from this very simple lemma, I can tell you that in fact the series which I have here converges uniformly on any compact set of C. Let me just tell you why. What I claim here is in fact, let me call this star, so a new lemma. Star converges uniformly on any compact subset of C. So, why? If you have a compact subset, let us say that K is a compact subset, then there exists some K, K0, such that the real part of S is larger than or equal to K0 plus 3/2. 3/2 minus K0. There exists a K0 larger than or equal to 0, such that the real part of S is larger than 3/2 minus K0 for all S in K. Just because, in fact, a compact set is bounded, in fact, it means that the real part of S on this compact set is bounded below, and therefore, if I remove a sufficiently large integer, in fact, I will have this inequality that holds. And also, there exists a constant, capital A, such that absolute value of S is bounded by capital A for all S in K. This is just because K is bounded. And therefore, if I try to bound the term which I have here, not the first terms can be pretty complicated, not nice at all. But for the terms corresponding to K larger than or equal to my K0, I can bound them very easily. for all k larger than or equal to 0 and all s in my compact set, if I take the term which is, let us say, s times s plus 1 up to s plus k minus 1 divided by k plus 1 factorial times zeta of s plus k, and if I try to bound this, in fact I can bound it completely trivially. I just say, since absolute value of s is less than a, the first term is less than a, the second one is less than a plus 1. This one is less than a plus k minus 1. This one is just k plus 1 factorial. And the zeta of s plus k, I use the fact that k is larger than k0, and therefore when I take the real part of s plus k, it will be larger than 3/2, and therefore I am allowed to use the bound which I have here. So, in fact, it will be two. I will have a 2. I will have a n to the power 1 minus sigma minus k. And since I have assumed that sigma is larger than 3/2 minus k0, I can just put here, I can replace sigma by 3/2 minus k0, and I get minus 1/2 plus k0 minus k. And I get this bound. This bound does not depend anymore at all on the element s, which is in capital K. So I have a bound for the general term of the series which does not depend anymore on my point. And now I have to see whether in fact the series which I have here, which the series when I vary k, for k larger than or equal to k0, whether this series converges. Indeed, let me see. Yes, I will assume that n is at least 2. I will assume n at least 2. In fact, I should do something else for n equal 1, but does not matter. I will not need it anymore. So if I just assume n larger than or equal to 2 here, I have something which is a geometric series of rate 1/2, like 1/2 to the power minus k, whereas this is something that is only growing like a polynomial in k. So a polynomial in k times 2 to the power minus k, this is the general term of a convergent series, and therefore the series with general term this converges, and this proves that my series here is uniformly convergent on any compact set on C. It proves something more. It proves something more. The same proof gives something more. If, let us say, a real part of S is strictly larger than 1/2, in fact, then I can start applying this kind of bound from the first term on, because a real part of S plus 1 will be larger than 3/2, and here 5/2, and therefore these bounds are valid, and these bounds depend on n. And of course, when n grows, these bounds are going to 0 when n is going to infinity. So it means that if I take the difference between this term and this term, all the remaining term will go to 0 when n goes to infinity. So this is exactly the conclusion which I will prove. If real part of S is larger than a half, then n to the power 1 minus s divided by s minus 1 minus zeta of s converges to 0 when n goes to plus infinity, and this convergence is uniform on any compact set. Of course, of the region where real part of S is larger, in fact larger than or equal to 1/2 is okay. I have put 1/2 in order to have simple bounds. If you if you keep the 1 minus sigma minus 1, and if you let vary sigma, in fact you can go up to 0. It doesn't matter so much. In fact, the 1/2 is not really something. It is true also when real part of S is strictly bigger than 0. Doesn't matter for me because I'm only interested at integers, therefore having 1/2 of or 0 doesn't matter so much. Now, if on the other hand I assume that the real part of S, this does not allow us to reach the point 0. If I want to reach the point 0, I have to get a statement which is valid when the real part of S is larger than or equal to minus 1/2. When I take this, in fact, I have to take this term, this term, this term, and only from this term on, I know that in fact my upper bounds are valid and that they go to 0 when n is going to infinity. The other ones I do not know. So in fact, if I have real part of S larger than minus 1/2, then I know that n to the 1 minus s divided by s minus 1 minus zeta of s, and I put just the other term, minus s over 2 factorial zeta of s plus 1 converges to 0 when n goes to infinity.
Why do you write to 0?
What?
Why do you say it converges to 0?
To 0 because in fact all the other terms are bounded by expression of this form, where in fact I have a negative power of n, and when in fact I let n go to infinity, in fact this negative power will tend to 0. So all the other terms are in fact bounded by powers of increasing powers of n, and n is going to plus infinity.
You mean zeta of s
What?
sub n, right?
Yes, absolutely. You are absolutely right. I need to put an index sub n. Absolutely. This is essential. Absolutely. Did I put it here? Yes, this is absolutely essential. And here also an index sub n. Converges to 0 when n goes to plus infinity. And this is uniformly on any compact set in the same sense as before. Okay, now we are in a very good position because we will just use, if we want to study what happens near 1, in fact, we are in a region where real part of S is larger than or equal to 1/2, and if we have a series of function that converges uniformly to 0, in fact, then the same is true for the sequence of their derivatives. If they are holomorphic functions, the same is true for all their higher derivatives, and therefore the same is true for all their coefficients of the Taylor expansion at 1. So the same is true for their derivatives, and therefore for their coefficients. Taylor coefficients at 1. So now it's just an exercise. We will take this function. So I rewrite this function, I change the sign, doesn't matter, and I rewrite this function. How can I rewrite this function? This function, which is zeta of s index n minus n to the power 1 minus s divided by s minus 1. I take this function which converges to 0. So you have to remember what is zeta s index n. It means it is zeta of s minus the sum that you stop at capital N, n to the minus s. This is the first term. And then I have the second term, and the second term, I will write it minus capital N to the minus s minus 1 divided by s minus 1. And then I will write minus 1 over s minus 1. So, in fact, you see, it was not completely obvious, but this function is a holomorphic function, in fact. You have the zeta of s minus 1 over s minus 1. This is a holomorphic function. This n to the 1 minus s minus 1 divided by s minus 1 is a holomorphic function. And this is a holomorphic function. So you have, in fact, a holomorphic function in the whole. And so we know that this holomorphic function, which depends on capital N, is going to 0 uniformly on any compact set with real part larger than 1/2, in particular on some small neighborhood of 1. And therefore, if we expand this holomorphic function into power series, in fact, we know that the limit of the case coefficient of this holomorphic function, in fact, will go to 0. So, in fact, the case, let us compute the case coefficient Taylor coefficient of this function at 1. And multiply it by minus 1 to the power k times k factorial, so that we eliminate these things. So I cannot do it separately with zeta of s and 1 over s minus 1, because this is not a holomorphic function and this is not a holomorphic function, but I can take zeta of s minus 1 over s minus 1 together. Together, it is a holomorphic function, and I know what is exactly the expansion. The expansion was exactly the expansion given with the Stieltjes constant. And when I look at the coefficient and multiply it by minus 1 to the power k times k factorial, what do I get? I get exactly gamma k, the gamma k which I am interested in. So I get gamma k. This comes from the first and fourth term together. This one and this one. Now I have to expand this thing minus the sum for n going from 1 to capital N, and I have to expand n to the minus s near s equal 1. So you just write the following thing: n to the minus s is equal to n times n to the 1 minus s, and you expand near 1. This is n times the sum for k going from 0 to infinity, and n to the minus 1 minus s is just 1 minus s to the power k log n to the power k divided by k factorial. So instead of writing 1 minus s to the power k, I can write n times the sum for k going from 0 to infinity minus 1 to the power k divided by k factorial log n to the power k times s minus 1 to the power k. And what I want is to take the case coefficient of this function, multiply it by minus 1 to the power k times k factorial. This makes this factor disappear. And then the coefficient which I get is just log n to the power k. Oh, excuse me, here there is a n to the minus 1, 1 over n, not n. And here it's 1 over n, and it's log n to the power k divided by n. And now I have this term that remains. So I have to compute for this term. Let me just do the computation here. It's computed exactly in the same way. N to the power 1 minus s minus 1 divided by s minus 1. This is the sum for k going from 1 to infinity, minus 1 to the power k divided by k factorial s minus 1 to the power k log capital N to the power k. This accounts for the numerator, and since I divide by s minus 1, I have just, instead of a power k, I have a power k minus 1. And I can rewrite this by changing variables. I call k minus 1k, then k will go from 0 to infinity. It will be minus 1 to the power k plus 1 divided by k plus 1 factorial s minus 1 to the power k log capital N to the power k plus 1. And now what I have to pick up in this series, I have to pick up the coefficient of s minus 1 to the power k, which is a coefficient which I see here. I have to multiply it by minus 1 to the power k. I will still have a factor minus 1, which will remain. I will have to multiply it by k factorial. I will have a 1 over k plus 1, which will remain. And finally, I will have a log n to the power k plus 1. So in fact, all computations done, what I get here is, let me see, and there is another minus sign which is here, so at the end I get plus log n to the power k plus 1 divided by k plus 1. So this is exactly the case coefficient of this function. And since this function goes to 0 uniformly when n goes to infinity, it means that this coefficient will go to 0 when capital N is going to infinity. Therefore, we have a conclusion. This term is going to 0, and therefore gamma k is the limit when capital N goes to plus infinity of the sum for n going from 1 to capital N log n to the power k divided by n minus log of capital N to the power k plus 1 divided by k plus 1. And therefore, it is the same thing as the regularized value, regularized limit of the sum log n to the power k divided by n for n going from 1 to capital N, which is the theorem which I announced I would prove. So in fact, this is exactly still just theorem. And let us now try to work out what happens at 0, to see what happens at 0. Let me see, yes, I still have a small amount of time. So of course, if we have to work at 0, instead of taking only these two terms, because these two terms work well only when real part of S is larger than 1/2, we have to take 3 terms because we want to have a region that covers a small neighborhood of 0. And you understand very well, I take these 2 examples, that if you want to work at -1, you will just, in the translation formula, to keep 1 more term, and that's all. So in fact, the strategy is now completely clear. We have in this translation formula only to care about finitely many terms. Each of these terms, we have to expand it completely formally, and we know that we will get a limit, and we have a proof, in fact, that tells that the limit exists and what it is, and what is the modification that you have to put in front of your truncated series in order to have that the limit exists. So the polynomial p of n log n, you find it also by this method, so you find everything. I will do the computation now in this particular case. So the case S equals 0. So I rewrite the various terms which I have here. I change just the signs. The zeta of S index n is zeta of S minus the sum for n going from 1 to capital N, n to the minus S, minus S over 2 let me see. Yes, and in fact, the zeta of S plus 1 index n, I will not keep it because I do not want to keep the zeta of S plus 1. I use the small following trick. If real part of S is larger than -1/2, in fact, real part of S plus 1 is larger than 1/2. And therefore, for zeta of S plus 1, I can apply the previous formula which I had. Zeta of S plus 1 minus this elementary term was going to 0 when n is going to infinity. So instead of keeping this term, I will keep the corresponding term which I get here for S plus 1, of course. So in fact, I will have plus S over 2 times I have to replace S by S plus 1, so it is n to the minus S divided by S, and then I have this term is minus n to the power minus S divided by S minus 1. So in fact, this converges to 0 when n goes to plus infinity. Uniformly in a neighborhood of 0. Hence, its case coefficient, Taylor coefficient, converges to 0 when n goes to plus infinity. So now we have to compute what is a case coefficient. So in fact, I will take the case coefficient as usual, and I shall multiply this case coefficient by -1 to the power k factorial in order not to have these stupid constants everywhere. And I compute this for each term. Here it's yes. Here I am a little bit more happy than in the previous case, because in this case all the 4 terms are holomorphic near 0. For zeta we know it. This is a finite sum of holomorphic function. Here I have a priori an s in the denominator, but since I have also an s in the numerator, in fact they cancel each other and I have a holomorphic function. And here also this function is holomorphic at 0. Therefore I can just separately, I have not to group terms together, I can compute the Taylor coefficient for each term and try to get the result. So let us try to do it for zeta. By definition, for zeta, I had said that zeta of s, I write it as the sum for k going from 0 to infinity, -1 to the power k delta k divided by k factorial s to the power k. So when I take the case coefficient multiplied by -1 to the power k factorial, what I get is just delta k. This comes from the first term. Now we have to take the second term. So second term, it's a sum for n going from 1 to capital N. And I have to expand n to the minus s, near 0. N to the minus s is e to the minus s log n. So it is a sum of -1 to the power k, s to the power k, divided by k factorial times log n to the power k. So when you remove the -1 to the power k and k factorial, what remains is just log n to the power k. Now you have to take the next term. Next term, the s cancel, you have a 1/2, and you have just to expand capital N to the minus s. Capital N to the minus s, it is just the case coefficient as exactly same computation as before. It is log n to the power k. Then you have this term. So this term is slightly more complicated because in fact the n to the 1 minus s, I can very easily expand it. It is n times the sum for k going from 0 to infinity minus 1 to the power k log n to the log capital N to the power k s to the power k divided by k factorial. But if I have also the minus 1 over s minus 1, which is plus 1 over 1 minus s, I have also to expand this near 0. And when I expand this near 0, it is just the sum for k going from 0 to infinity of s to the power k. And therefore, when I multiply the two, I get n to the power 1 minus s divided by 1 minus s. This is the sum for k going from 0 to infinity, s to the power k. And I have here a coefficient ck. And my coefficient ck is just the sum for I plus j is equal to k of the coefficient here of index I and the coefficient here of index j. The coefficient of index j is just 1, so minus 1 to the power I times log capital N to the power I divided by I factorial. And I have to take this coefficient ck and multiply it by minus 1 to the power k factorial. So in fact I get here plus sum for I going from 0 to k of -1. Let me just write the last term here, otherwise it's yes, okay. No, maybe I just erase here and I continue. Below. So in fact, plus sum for I going from 0 to k minus 1 to the power k minus I, let us say, k factorial divided by I factorial log capital N to the power I. So this is in fact the coefficient of the last term. And what I know here that this is going to 0 when capital N is going to plus infinity. This is what I know. And I want to reinterpret this in terms, let me see, just one moment. I have forgotten a factor n. Yes, I had forgotten the factor n which came from n to the power 1 minus s before. I had forgotten this factor n. Okay. Yes, conclusion. In fact, delta k is the regularized value of the sum for n going from 1 to capital N log n to the power k if k is at least 1 but not when k is 0. Why? Because you see delta k is in fact this sum where you modify this sum by something which is exactly a polynomial in n log n. I have found a polynomial in n log n, which when I modify this sum, in fact, there is a limit. And this exactly means that the delta k is a regularized value in the sense which I had defined at the beginning. Except that we have to check whether the polynomial that we have here is a polynomial with no constant term. When in these terms, certainly you have no constant term because capital N is always involved. There is no constant term. But in this term that you have here, when k is equal to 0, you have a constant term. So in fact, because the polynomials that we find can have non-constant terms, in fact, it is not true that the general rule works always. But nevertheless, it tells us that in fact delta 0 is what? Delta 0 is the limit when capital N goes to plus infinity of this expression where I take k equals 0. So let us take k equals 0. It is the limit of sum of n going from 1 to capital N of 1, the log n to the power 0, plus 1/2 for k equals 0. Then I have plus another term which is just do I have a sign mistake somewhere? Do I have sign mistake? Oh, mamma mia. No, because this is going to 0. So in fact, I have to put this on the other side. Yes, I have to put this on the other side. When I put this on the other side, it's a minus 1/2 here. And here, it gives me minus capital N. Of course, this sum is just capital N. This, you remove the capital N, you have the minus 1/2, and that you get minus 1/2. So you prove, again, a thing which we had already proved last time, is that zeta of 0 is equal to minus 1/2. But you cannot apply stupidly the formula with the regularized value for k equals 0. But for k larger than or equal to 1, it works, and we have a complete proof of this result. So, of course, the strategy which I have explained here by taking two examples, 0 and 1, works with no difficulty, except that you have to be a little bit careful about your indices, your abscissa of convergence, how many terms you take and how you manage your thing. But it works exactly with no difference in the general case when you, for example, want to expand the thing at negative integers. Now I propose, if you wish, an exercise that you might do in maybe a seminar class, not today because perhaps one has to prepare it, but in fact in the first lecture by Maxime, he proved the functional equation for the Riemann zeta function, which relates the Riemann zeta function at S to the Riemann zeta function at 1 minus S. And of course, you have some gamma factors which are involved in this functional equation. Now, the expansion near 0 or near 1/2 or near 1 of the gamma function can be explicitly written, in fact, and we have the expansion at 1, and we have the expansion at 0. We have this gamma constant called Stiges constant, and we have the delta constant, which are the coefficient at 0. There should exist, therefore, a relation between them. So an exercise is to try, at least for the first 2 or 3, to write down explicitly what are the relations between the coefficients at 1 and the coefficient at 0. I propose this as an exercise. Okay, for today I will just stop here. I have achieved my goal.